You calm my raging seas. You walk with me through fire and heal all my disease. I trust in you. I trust in you. I believe you're my healer. I believe you are all I need. I believe, and I believe you're my portion. I believe you're more than enough for me. Jesus, you're all I need. You hold my every moment. You calm my raging seas. You walk with me through fire, heal all my disease. I trust in you, Lord. I trust in you. I believe you're my healer. I believe you are all I need. Lord, I believe you're my portion. I believe you're more than enough for me. Jesus, you're all I need. Nothing is impossible for you. Nothing is impossible. Nothing is impossible for you. You hold my world in your hands. Nothing is impossible for you. Nothing is impossible. Nothing is impossible for you. You hold my world in your hands. I believe you're my healer. I believe you are all I need. Oh, yes, you are. Yes, you are. And I believe you're my portion. Lord, I believe you're more than enough for me. Jesus, you're all I need. More than enough for me. Jesus, you're all I need. You're my healer.
Good morning, Long Hill Chapel Online. We are so grateful you're joining us today. My name is Daria Hasty, and I am on the ministry staff here. We are super excited today because Long Hill Chapel is celebrating 75 years of having their doors open, and that is something to celebrate. Before we get to the celebration, I want to draw your attention to our website. This is the hub of all of our communication. This is where you will find different ministries that are going on, different groups you can get plugged into, Bible studies. There's also an online connect card, which we love because it gives opportunity for us to connect with you while you're at home. If you have a prayer request, if you have a need, click on that connect card and submit it, and one of us will get back to you during the week. I also want to thank you. Because of your faithful giving, we're able to continue those ministry opportunities. We're able to be a light in our community with the different ministries and organizations that are going on. And that would not be possible if it wasn't for your giving. We have 3 ways where you can give online at our website, www.lhcnj.net. You can do it in person if you're here with us at any time. And then also on our app. This is a great way too. We have an app and you can just go right on there and enter credit card or check information and it goes directly to our account. And for all of that, we are very thankful. Well, I only have one announcement today, and that is a big one. We have a missions trip coming up, and we are excited to be partnering with the Romanos again in the Dominican Republic. Our missions trip is going to be from February 12th to the 19th. It's for anyone ages 12 years old and up. And you can contact Pastor Andy at lhcnj.net for more information. We do have a deadline coming up of November 21st. So if you have questions or interest, please contact him as soon as possible. And with that, will you join us right now for worship?
History, your faithfulness has walked beside me. The winter storms made way for spring. In every season from where I'm standing, I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. Help me sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe out of the silence. The roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe out of the silence. The roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Jesus, yours is the victory. Oh, hallelujah. Praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah. Praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah. Death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name. Jesus Christ, my living hope.
Good morning, LHC kids. I'm Miss Daria, and I'm so excited you're joining me today. We are so happy that today we are celebrating Long Hill Chapel being open for 75 years. In a few minutes, you're going to hear some stories from some of our church members. Then you're going to hear a message about how God has been so faithful to our church in the past, right now, and what he's doing as we move forward. But today what I want to talk to you about is the legacy that you leave behind and the legacy that you have impact in being part of. And some of you might be saying, Miss Aria, I don't know what legacy means. I'm going to tell you. So legacy is the impact you leave. It's what you do. So in regards to the church, we have some LHC youth, our teenagers that help with our children's classes every Sunday. They are leaving an impact on the hearts of the kids that they are serving with and the teachers that they volunteer alongside. You might be at home and in your neighborhood, loving on your community, helping with raking the leaves. Those are things that leave an impact on people's hearts. Those are things that can leave a legacy behind, okay, in the way that we act, in the way that we are, and the way that we show the love of Jesus. Now, it doesn't mean that all the times are good, and it doesn't mean all the times are bad. We've talked about seasons where things in our life are going great, and then we've talked about those seasons where it's really hard and we just want to, be done with that part. I totally understand that, trust me. God is going to reveal so much to you in those times. He's going to draw you closer to him. Then you're going to be able to pour out and show others just how faithful he has been in your life. We're able to do that at Long Hill Chapel. We're able to show and share how God has been so faithful through all the seasons that we've gone through over the last 75 years. And then we can all take a look at ourselves. What's the impact we're leaving behind in our church family? What's the impact we're leaving behind in our communities? How are we showing the love of Jesus and being there for others around us? So those are things for you to think about. If you are with us in church in person, or you come and go every few weeks or whatever it is that your family does, maybe think about ways that you can serve and be part of the church family and what impact you can have in the legacy of Long Hill Chapel. Then the other thing is you can think about ways that you can leave an impact in your community, in your neighborhood. We talked about that weeks ago when we talked about missions and different ways we can serve. Think about ways that you can be the hands and feet of Jesus and the ways that you can leave an impact on those around you.
I hope you have a great Sunday. Enjoy it. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Bye, kids.
So we came to Long Hill Chapel right after we were married in 1984. And we came here and we found a place that was welcoming, a place that preached the gospel, and a place where we raised both of our children.
Our plan was to find a good church first before a home, and so that we could live near that church, because we had 4 kids. So we wanted to make sure we lived near a church and had a Bible-believing, preaching church.
2012, I think it was.
Yeah, 2012.
We were invited here by Jason, my son, because him and his wife went here, and we were doing something with them that day. I don't remember what it was. And our church that we were going to in Hackettstown started like an hour later. So we wanted to get a jump start on the day, so we came here to Long Hill. And when I heard the contemporary worship, I had tears in my eyes. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So we decided that we would come maybe once a month,
visit our son.
Yeah, visit our son and
come to church with them.
Mm-hmm. So that was really a great experience. And we started coming more and more, so I especially could get my fill of the worship, because I just loved it so much.
Mm-hmm. And the sermons.
And one of the things that got us here was the worship, but what kept us here was the preaching.
It was a place that we always felt like the scripture was being taught, and that we could keep learning, we could keep growing, keep being stretched. We knew it was a place where there was community for all of us, for me and for Ron and for our boys, that there was, because we are a family, but we are also individuals, and that we all found community here.
It was Bible-based, Jesus as the center. And since we've been here, it's always been that way.
This has always been a godly church, preaching the gospel. And it hasn't been perfect. We've had some ups and downs, of course, but I never felt that, or we never felt that we should leave.
When times got a little rougher here in recent years, it was difficult to persevere, and yet God wasn't releasing us from this place, and He gave us the strength to help bring this place back to a place of stability, and we came very close as a church to not being a church, and that wasn't God's will.
It was knowing that the Lord was still in this house, that we were still Christ-centered at this church, no matter how difficult the times were.
We just felt that it was our church.
Seeing the excitement in life, and to see things actually being in a place where I feel like there's new life to turn things over to.
Wherever you go to church, get planted. Get involved in the church. Just don't come on Sunday and worship and go home.
Absolutely.
Be part of the church.
It's to see and to hear about the hand of God, how God has been instrumental in leading this church to places where only God can lead it. And that's exciting for me to know, to see God's hand in things, and to understand that there is a purpose, there is a place for this church and this community to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Oh man, I'm so glad you have joined us today. As you've already heard, today we celebrate 75 years of Long Hill Chapel. My name is Michael. I'm the lead pastor here at Long Hill, and I just have the honor to be part of this church with my family in this season, and we do consider it an incredible honor, especially as we both look back and see where we've been, but we also look ahead and see what God has for us in the future as we continue on. So about 75 years ago, November 19th, 1946, to be exact, the group of people who would become Long Hill Chapel met for the first time. And they were gathered together by a desire to see a Bible-believing church planted here in Chatham Township, because it was immediately after World War II, and there really wasn't a lot of that yet that was happening in the township, and there were some churches that came after that, but Long Hill was one of the very first. And so that was their vision, that was their hope, and now we, so many years later, we stand on the shoulders of that legacy. And for you today, if you're watching or listening to this, that is the point, and this is the point where your story intersects with that story and with our story. Because I know, especially online, some of you who watch, you used to come here, maybe you've moved away, you live in some other part of the country or even the world now, and you still check in with us from time to time, but you remember that season of your life where the story of what was going on at Long Hill Chapel impacted and intersected your story. Some of you, you're currently part of Long Hill and you're just part of online church today. Maybe you do that every week. Maybe you just did that this week. But we're walking together. And the other thing I've discovered that's really unique is that there's probably a few of you who are checking us out for the first time. So many of the folks who have come to Long Hill and they've come in person, they start out checking out what we're like online. And that's one of the gifts and the benefits that is available to us because of technology. But for all of those things, your story, your legacy, and story is a word I know I use a lot, it intersects the story or the legacy of this church. From different points, from different perspectives, we're all encountering the same thing. We're encountering legacy. You know, as I was watching the video that you all just saw, there was something that struck me. Last week here at Long Hill, we had the opportunity to have a new members class, and I was able to present at that and do so for some folks who are relatively new to Long Hill Chapel, and just what a great gift it is for all the new life and the growth that we've been able to see here at Long Hill. And what's interesting is I started that out, and I asked them each to share the things that really had connected them here, the things that drew them to Long Hill, and the things that they loved about this church. And what was interesting is the things that this relatively new group of people shared were the exact same things that you saw Steve and Sue and Ron and Nadine and Toonie share in the video. It's the legacy of this church. And legacy, at its simplest, is a story. It's a story of how things were, of how they've come, of the things that have happened, of the things that are important, of the turning points, of the high points and of the low points. And certainly here at Long Hill, we've experienced all of that and so much more. But legacy goes farther than that. It's not just a story in isolation. It's how all of those things have impacted people and they've impacted the world around us. And how that's happening right now, and even how that might happen at some point in the future. Because here's something that's true. All of the people, all of the circumstances, all of the places that you spend your time and you spend your life, they have a legacy with you. And you have the same with others. And as you know, and as I know, some of those stories are incredibly positive stories. Others, not so much. They're just not positive. There's things you wish you could change or erase and go back from, but they're there nonetheless. None of them are perfect. There are no perfect legacies. There's no perfect path that a person or a place or even a church leaves behind it. But the question we always have to address is this: what will we do with the legacy that we have, and what will we do with the legacy that we're being given? You know, your kids, if you have kids, they will one day do this with your story. They'll look back, they'll remember the good parts, they'll consider the negative parts, but they'll look back, and there's literal pieces of your life that they will have to do something with. There's pieces they'll hold on to, and there's pieces that they will keep with them as they go forward. But here's the unique thing. When it comes to a place like this church, when it comes to a place like Long Hill Chapel, the legacy, if we do this right, it's not something that has a beginning point and an end point. It doesn't have a birth date and then it has a death date. It is something that is continually remade and is something that is continually reborn if we're handling it well. Because what's going on is all the time, there's a handing off of the legacy by some or parts of it, and then there's a receiving of it by others. And this works across generations. This works across seasons of life. This works across just seasons in time. And when we stop doing that well, when we stop releasing the legacy to the people who are coming behind us, and when the people who are coming behind us stop receiving it well, that's when things really begin to slip. Here's an example of what that looks like. I don't know if you've ever, when we watch the Summer Olympics, or maybe you've watched it somewhere else, you've watched a relay race. And a relay race is when there's a whole bunch of runners who run the race, and they win or lose the race together. And there's this thing they carry. It's a baton. And they have to hand off the baton. And handing it off and receiving it are the things that matter for winning the race. There's all sorts of ways that this can go poorly. Imagine if the first runner just never let go of the baton. They never handed it off. Or imagine if they tried to hand it off and the person behind them, they didn't receive it and it fell on the ground. Or imagine if that person just dropped it and walked away. There's all sorts of ways that could go sideways. But when it goes well, they win the race together. But here's the thing for us at Long Hill Chapel, or really at any church, is that this doesn't just happen once or twice. This is something that happens over and over again, because the finish line for us isn't even the end of our lives or the end of our season or the end of our time. The finish line for us is the literal return of Jesus Christ. And so we keep giving that legacy and receiving that legacy until Jesus comes back. So what do you do when you're the carrier of a legacy? What about if you're one of those people who's in a position to receive it from someone who's carried it faithfully? Today, we're going to look back into the Old Testament, the first half of the Bible, and we're going to look at one of the epic handoffs that's found in all of Scripture. And it's between two prophets who served in that ancient time in the Jewish state in the northern kingdom, and one was named Elijah and the other was named Elisha. It's kind of easy to keep them together because their names are so similar. But Elijah had come on the scene, and he had lived this incredibly action movie, epic adventure life. He had confronted kings. He had faced down prophets from a false god on a mountain. He had seen miracles happen. He had this incredible dramatic story, but now he knows, and the people around him are beginning to understand that he's come to the end of it. And there's this man, Elisha, who is his apprentice, the one who's been following in his footsteps, who's been learning to do the things that he does. And we discover as the curtain comes up on the narrative that we're going to read today in 2 Kings chapter 2, that the handoff is about to happen. And the story goes like this, beginning at verse 1. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "so be quiet." I love that response. Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. the company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "so be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan, to the river Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. You know, if you take this journey, and what we see is Elijah's kind of leaving, and he's trying to get rid of Elisha. He's trying to say, stay here. I'm just going to go on and do this myself. If you look at a map of the ancient cities and the areas that he went, this journey makes absolutely no sense whatever. It's these three locations. They're not in a straight line. He's kind of meandering around the ancient lands. But what we discover when we look at the background of what's going on, and you can even see it in the story a little bit, is there were these schools of prophets at each of these locations where Elijah goes. And these are groups of people, and this is a movement and a work that he's been associated with for his entire life. And so in a way, Elijah knows that his time is limited. He knows more acutely than you or I do how much time he has left, that this is the day. And so he's kind of on this farewell tour of the places where he's lived his life and where he's had his impact. And you and I do versions of this ourselves when we leave a place for the last time or we move out of a house. I remember the first house we lived in, when we moved out, I walked through each room and I just remembered all of the things that had happened there. All of the good, all of the difficult times, all of the laughter, all of the tears. And we just visit the spots and we remember. When you move away from some place, you do the same thing. You kind of take one last drive around and then you head out of town. And we see kind of the struggle beginning to happen with Elijah. It's almost like he's reluctant to embrace this. He knows that he has limited time. He knows that the influence he has is left, and it's almost like it's just hard for him to figure out how to release it and how to let go of it. He kind of tries to get rid of Elisha in this moment so he can face it in some ways by himself. I don't know if you've ever had one of those people over to your house and they just don't take the hint that it's time for them to go home. And that's kind of what this looks like. Elijah's just like, stay here, I'm going to go here. And Elisha's like, nope, I'm not letting go of you. And we can feel this kind of a struggle like Elijah feels with our lives. Because here's the thing, when you have invested yourself, when you've invested your energy, when you've given your very self, your energy, your life, your days, your years, your heart to something like Elijah so clearly did to his ministry, which was full of high stakes, risky stuff where it could have gone really wrong, but where he saw the hand of God over and over again. There were some really low points, but there were some really high points as well. Walking away from that is incredibly hard, because here's the thing, is the thing that makes you and the thing that makes me and the thing that makes someone like Elijah so good at carrying a legacy is exactly the same thing that makes it so hard to let go. You've wanted to carry it well. You don't want to let it slip from your grasp. You want to be a good steward of what's been given you in life. And that same impulse that makes you so good at it is the exact same thing that makes it hard for you to know when to let things go. And this isn't just true with church. It's not just true in a story like this. It's true in every area in our life with the things we've been given to steward, the resources, the time, the money, the relationships, our marriages, our kids, and the time that we live here on earth. And the story goes on in verse 7. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance. And so what's happened is Elisha and Elijah have gone, and now they're at the river Jordan. And there's this group of people who's come out, and they're kind of watching what's about to happen because they know that something is going to happen. They know that Elijah's going to be taken up to heaven. So this is like the spectators showing up, knowing that something is going to happen. Facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan, Elijah took his cloak, he rolled it up and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. So Elijah has this cloak. And what this is this was like a mantle that he wore, but it was a symbol of his authority. This is a very similar story to a couple other stories that we discover in the New Testament. One of them was when Moses and the Jewish people crossed the Red Sea as they left Egypt. And Moses had this symbol. He had the staff that he used, and it was the thing that represented his authority. It was the thing that represented the hand of God. And it's always in play. And so when those waters divided, it was because Moses had his staff. And we see the same thing happens here. Elijah takes the symbol of the authority that God has given him, the mantle that's been placed on him, and it's the thing that divides the sea. It's the thing that parts the water. This will be really important in just a little bit. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I'm taken from you? Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. And when we see this phrase, it has tremendous significance for the people for whom this was originally written. When we look at this, we say, hey, Elisha wants to be twice the prophet that Elijah was. But instead what's going on here is Elisha is invoking a Hebrew principle of the firstborn. When we look back in the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 21, we discover something that the firstborn son would receive a double portion of the inheritance. And so what Elisha is asking for is he's asking for to be recognized as the successor, to be recognized as the one who will take up the mantle of his spiritual father. That's what Elisha is asking for. Legacy keepers of Long Hill Chapel, those of you who have been here for a while now, you know that there's new folks coming in. You know that there's new life that's happening here. You know that if you come into the building, if you have the opportunity to do that on a Sunday morning, the aisles and the rows and the downstairs are just crawling with little kids. It is such an exciting time to be here. And on behalf of all of those kids, on behalf of all of the new life, we are asking to be recognized as your spiritual heirs. We're asking to be recognized as the ones who will take up the mantle that you have stewarded so well. The legacy that you have maintained and that you have left. We are asking for a double portion of the same Spirit, that you would embrace us as spiritual sons and daughters in the same legacy, in the same family. Elijah replies, he says, "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I'm taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." And here's the thing we need to understand is that God is the one who gives this. God is the one who does this. We are the keepers of it, but it is actually something that God has given us. We have the opportunity to release it. The story goes on in verse 11. As they were walking together along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. And so we see the other side of the story emerge. As much as it seems like Elijah is just not sure how to navigate this transition, we also see that Elisha is struggling with receiving what is being given to him. You know, as Elijah tries to depart to all those places, Elisha says, "There's no way I'm leaving your sight. I'm getting as much time with you as I can. I'm staying close to you for as long as I can, and I'm hoping the inevitable doesn't happen. Or I'm trying to hold it off as long as I possibly can." And now what finally happens, and Elisha grieves. He tears hold of his garment, he tears it in two, and he grieves. And so this is the struggle of legacy. There are the keepers of the legacy, and then there are the receivers of the legacy. And both of these things are very hard to do. It's hard to hand it off, and it's hard to take the baton because of the enormity of all that's happened, of all that's gone before us. In times past here, I've talked about the fact that it is incredibly humbling for me to stand on this platform every week and be called one of the pastors here at Long Hill Chapel, because of the legacy that's been left over these 75 years. Great men and women, towering saints of faith, missionaries, preachers, everyone else that has gone before. And now there's someone like me, and it's hard sometimes to receive that. But God hands it to us and says, it's your turn to take the baton. But there's something amazing that happens here in this passage, because there's something that we discover about how Elijah goes. In Scripture, Elijah is only the second person at that time who escapes death. Back in the book of Genesis, there was a man named Enoch who God took, and it says he was just no more. He was taken up, and that was the end of it. He did not see death. And we discover that Elijah, it's the same thing for him. And there's an arc to everyone's life. You know, there was a day that you were born. There's a day that I was born. And we go through our lives, and it ascends, and there's at some point there's a peak in our lives where we increase in importance and impact, and it's kind of the high point of the story. And then it begins at some point to diminish. It's like the rising and the setting of the sun. It's like the changing of the seasons. And for all of us, unless Jesus comes back first, there will be a day where we pass from this earth and we die. And so many of the things that we invest in our lives have seasons that pass, suns that rise and set. Our children, our careers, the places that we live. Even that time and those times in our life where it just seems like everything lines up the way it should. We instinctively know, even in those moments, that those things are not forever. And so we shift, we reboot, we rebuild, we adjust, we retool, we line up for the next season. And sometimes we do it better than others, but inevitably for all of us, there's a time where we stop doing that. And here's where it's different when it comes to the legacy of a place like Long Hill Chapel. If we take that same mindset, that there's an endpoint to this story, we will miss everything that God has for us. Because like Elijah, what a place like Long Hill Chapel has the opportunity to do is to not face death, to actually be reborn into a new generation. I had a really interesting experience this week. I get the opportunity to go into a lot of churches and to work with them in various ways. And I was down in Trenton, New Jersey early this week, and I was in this church, and it was right as the sun was setting. This was the first week, like daylight savings time was no longer a thing. And I went down to see them, and I discovered that the church had been completely gutted, and there was no electrical power in the church. And so we were like walking around this church that was sort of under construction just by the light of a couple flashlights. And it was this amazing, beautiful stone edifice that had been built at the beginning of the 20th century. Beautiful big church. But it was a church that had had enough vision, and it had enough resources, and it had had enough energy to build this incredible monument, this incredible structure, this beautiful sanctuary with stained glass and a pipe organ. But the reason I was there was because that church was no longer. And so this story that at one point had a high point, it was the first day everyone gathered for worship in that building. I'm sure there were days where every seat was filled. It had come to an end. It had come to an ending point. It had come to a point of death, and there was no more handoff to happen. Now, let me be clear. The church, the big C, capital C, Church of Jesus Christ, will not perish. It will not die, because Jesus himself said that he will build his church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. But when it comes to a local congregation, there are so many stories like the story I witnessed this week, because every week in America, there are more churches that close than new ones that open. But here's the good news, is that God is always renewing his church. The story of that church I told you, another congregation completely unrelated to the first one was coming in, and they had purchased the building, and now they're remaking it, they're renovating it for the next generation of ministry that's going to happen in that place. And that's such a great redemptive part of the story. But there was a death that happened in the middle. And here's the good news for us, Long Hill Chapel, is there was such an opportunity for that to be true here, but it is not. And it will not be, because of how we will choose to handle the legacy that we have and that we've been given. Church, hear me. When you hold on to your legacy, you inevitably die, and it dies with you. When a church does this, it inevitably dies. It becomes an empty building, just like that one I went to earlier this week, that someone has to pick through and figure out what to do with. And I believe that God's heart for the church is that it's continually reborn. It's continually remade. I believe that he will do that here. He'll do it with us, and he'll do it in spite of us. And in the passage, we see that Elijah avoids that endpoint. He's taken up and he hands off the legacy. And there's something so special for a place like Long Hill Chapel where that legacy gets released into the next generation. It escapes death. That is such a rare and significant thing. And we're seeing it all over here. We're seeing new life literally crawling, running, screaming around the building. And it is such an amazing thing that we should never take for granted. So many of you who have kept these doors open and these lights on, you came here and you raised your kids here and your family here, and now maybe your kids are adults and you're still here, but there's another generation that's now coming in and it's doing the exact same thing, and that is a tremendous gift of God's grace. And the thing I know about you who are legacy keepers is that you want to pass that baton well. But now let me talk to the next generation, to those of you who Long Hill Chapel is a newer part of your story, because there's something we need to do as well. Verse 13, Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak. Remember what the cloak is. It's a symbol of Elijah's authority. It's that mantle of the responsibility that he's been given. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and he struck the water with it. Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah, he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. Remember his cloak earlier in the story, and exactly the same thing happened, except it was Elijah who was striking the water. And here's how this works for us, newer generation, the folks who are just coming in, the younger folks who are moving into town to raise our families, is we have to pick up the mantle. We have to pick up the cloak that is being given to us. We have to receive it. As much as the folks who have been faithful have to release it, we have to receive it, and then we have to carry it. And we have to learn now how to pass it to the next generation that's going to come after us when your kids grow up, when their kids grow up. And if we learn how to do that, I believe this church will not face death. Because here's the thing, the cloak didn't part the waters of the Jordan. God did. In the same way, there's nothing magical about the legacy, the mantle of this church. But it will be the thing that God uses in new ways to do miraculous things in new hands. It'll look different in a new generation. But God, the same God who was the God of Elijah, who parted the water the first time, will part the water again, but only if we receive it and then we put it to use. You know, as I look around this church, I see so many people who have been so faithful for so long, doing so much and doing it over and over again. Who is going to be the ones who follow in their footsteps? Who is going to pick up that cloak, receive that mantle? The story concludes. The company of the prophets from Jericho, remember, there's spectators watching this whole thing, who were watching said, the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. And they went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. So they witnessed this transition. They witnessed this transfer, and they concluded, hopefully what people conclude about us, that the spirit of the legacy keepers is now resting on the next generation, and God is going to do something significant through them. All of these spectators took notice of that. It caused them to take notice of the fact that the baton had been passed. And that is something that is happening here at Long Hill Chapel, and we get to celebrate it together. As we close today, you know, one of the things that happens on a date like this, where we look back and we recount the faithfulness of God, and you heard it in the videos. Then if you talk to anybody who's been here for a long time, they'll tell you some version of the same story. There were some really good days and good times. And there were some really difficult days and difficult times where nobody was sure of how it was going to work out. But God was faithful. And God is faithful. And we talk about the faithfulness of God, and a lot of times we talk about it when we're looking back. But it doesn't mean that God was just faithful there. It's just that it's most clear in the rearview mirror. But God's faithfulness is found here. And it's found in the future as well. It reaches back into the past. But it also allows us to release the past, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It allows us to release it knowing that God's faithfulness wasn't just back there. It is here now, and it will be with us in the future. It's not just a past recollection. It's a present reality, and it's a future certainty, no matter what the circumstances look like, because that's who God is. Those of you who have stewarded this church for so long and through so much and so far, through seasons of plenty and seasons of want, through thick and thin, thank you. You have honored God with your faithfulness, and He's multiplied and blessed it. But now we get to walk into the future knowing that God will be faithful there too. You know, the world around us is going to continue to change. Things will not look the way that they did. We all know that instinctively. As those things continue to happen, it is so easy for us to hang on to the thing that represents security and stability and safety. Just like we see Elisha doing with Elijah. But God is the one who's leading us on into a new chapter, that we would receive all that He has for us. So legacy keepers, continue to share the gift of your wisdom, your presence, and the richness of your experiences here. But pass the baton. And those of you who are relatively new here, just like that like Steve said in the video, don't just come to church here, get plugged in here. And that's one of the ways when you do that is you receive the baton. You're the ones who take this the next mile. You know, I want you to get this, is that God is inviting you now to be faithful in His faithfulness as we go into the future together. Receive the mantle and then carry it. Carry it back to the river and strike the water, knowing that the Spirit and the power of the same God is with you, as has been with us all of these years till now. Because the legacy is still being written. And you and I and us, we're the next chapters. Let's pray together. God, I thank you. Man, do I thank you for your faithfulness to this place. You have been faithful in the times that we have been faithful, and you have been faithful in the times that we have been less than faithful, because you are always faithful. We thank you for your faithfulness here at Long Hill. We thank you that that faithfulness shows us that you are far from done with us and far from done with this place. We receive the mantle that is being passed, and we covenant solemnly before you and with each other to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ from this place and these seats and all out into the community, that people would know that Jesus is high and lifted up in this place, and that would never stop. This would be a place where people are welcomed, where kids grow up and they're raised up into young men and women of God, where you are always worshiped, where we send our best out of these doors to carry your name to the very ends of the earth, and where you continue to do amazing and incredible things. Help us each see our part in that story, and help us receive it and then walk with it faithfully, even as much as those who have gone before us have been so faithful all the way till now. We thank you for 75 years, but we ask you for 75 more, and we ask you that the best would be yet to come. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. We were so glad that you're here. Have a great week. We'll see you soon.
The Word became a man, that my soul should know its Savior. Forsaken for the sake of all mankind, salvation is in his blood. Jesus Messiah, the righteous died for love.